we're looking at here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the Tree of Life, flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side.
For centuries, the world has tried to make sense of one of history's strangest puzzles, the Anunnaki. According to ancient Sumerian texts, these mysterious beings weren't just rulers. They came from the skies, carrying knowledge that changed everything.
The Anunnaki create the model man. That person gets picked up as a story in the Bible, and he's called Adam.
Some believe they helped shape early civilization, or even altered our DNA.
So they're talking about taking the DNA or genetics from one of themselves and mixing it with the DNA of the hominid that was here.
And now, 4,500 years later, scientists may have finally uncovered the truth about the Anunnaki. The first civilization. Long before modern science or advanced machines, there were people building empires. They did this using nothing but raw skill and what many believed was guidance from the gods. Raw skill and what many believed was guidance from the gods. One of the most fascinating examples of this comes from ancient Mesopotamia, which was where the Sumerians once thrived. The Sumerians existed millennia ago in territories now identified as Iraq and portions of Iran. The civilization existed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from approximately 4,500 BC to 1,750 BC. The achievements of that period stand out as exceptional even when measured against today's standards. For starters, they developed the plow, which transformed agricultural practices beyond recognition. It made farming faster and more efficient, and this helped their cities and population expand.
The Sumerians are also known for being the ones who built some of the earliest cities in the world.
Also, the earliest known writing system, cuneiform, emerged from their innovative efforts. They pressed symbols into moist clay tablets instead of using paper, and they recorded everything from trade deals to epic tales. Thanks to this, some of their written works have survived for thousands of years.
So this text literally, some of the letters actually relate to complete ideas.
The Sumerians even had their own way of keeping time. In fact, much of how we measure time today, like the idea of dividing hours and minutes into sets of 60, comes from them. But according to the ancient Sumerians, their achievements were not entirely their own. The people held a belief that powerful entities called the Anunnaki provided them assistance.
Flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side.
These were gods in Sumerian mythology, said to be descendants of Anu, the chief deity. Anu was believed to control the fate of both humans and even other gods. The Anunnaki were thought to guide, protect, and influence life on Earth. Evidence of these beliefs can be found in their ancient writings, one of which is the Epic of Gilgamesh. This popular ancient text is considered one of the earliest written works in human history.
And the epic that we think of as the Epic of Gilgamesh is just the longest and most complete one.
In it, references to gods, creation, and human struggles offer a limited view into how the Sumerians saw their place in the world. The Anunnaki held an incredibly important role in Sumerian society. Temples were built in their honor. Statues of these gods were carefully built and decorated. When special ceremonies came up, the Sumerians would even offer them food and carry their statues through the streets. And for thousands of years, these traditions were passed down. But many questions remained unanswered. Who exactly were the Anunnaki? Were they only symbols of belief? Or was there something more to their existence? In modern times, some researchers and theorists have taken a different approach to these ancient stories.
Sumerian culture receiving visitations from these mysterious higher entities that, bestowed wisdom and fantastic.
By the 20th century, new ideas began to spread. That is when the ancient alien theory entered the picture. It suggested that perhaps the Anunnaki were not just gods from myth, but advanced beings from another world. Sumerians, aliens, and the 12th planet. The ancient clay tablets of Mesopotamia have revealed plenty about the Sumerians, but some say they tell a stranger story than most historians will admit.
Ancient Sumer, when you look at their tablets and what are they saying, and why would they dedicate so much time to talking about this stuff?
And even today, scholars continue to study these tablets as they search for details about early civilization. However, in 1976, An author named Zechariah Sitchin offered a theory that took things in an entirely different direction. He believed the texts contained something far beyond agriculture and writing. According to him, they pointed to visitors from another world. Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet, claimed that the Anunnaki were not just powerful gods. They were advanced beings from a distant planet called Nibiru. He described Nibiru as a mysterious planet with a long, looping orbit. It follows this huge, stretched-out path through space and only swings by Earth roughly every 3,600 years.
These things take a long time to go around the sun. Even though we only had a small segment, we said its path is not following Newton's law.
Sitchin claimed that during one of those times, about 500,000 years ago, the Anunnaki came here. But they didn't just visit and head home. Apparently, they stayed. They soon set up their first settlements, which was right in the heart of Mesopotamia in the region we now call the Fertile Crescent. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers became their base of operations. According to Sitchin, they built more than cities. He believed they established a spaceport, a mission control center, and even mining operations. The mission was overseen by Anu, the supreme ruler of Nibiru, who stayed back on their home planet. His two sons, Enlil and Enki, were given responsibility for the mission on Earth. But their assignment was not without problems. Sitchin argued that the Anunnaki's true mission was driven by desperation. Their real interest was gold. The Anunnaki supposedly needed vast amounts of gold to repair and protect the atmosphere of Nibiru. Gold mining began near the Persian Gulf, but the process was slow and frustrating.
Anunnaki realized the toll it was taking to mine the gold themselves. They decided to fashion a worker being.
To solve this, Anu divided the leadership. Enlil was put in charge of the Mesopotamian colony known as Eden, which some believe may have inspired the idea of the Garden of Eden from the Bible. Meanwhile, Enki was sent to a region called Abzu, known today as parts of Africa. There, he organized gold mining operations in what Sitchin described as the land of the mines. The hunt for gold later expanded as far as South America. Sitchin also claimed that the mined gold was loaded onto cargo crafts and flown back to Mesopotamia. There, it was smelted into a type of purified ingot called zag, which were shaped like hourglasses. He even pointed to archaeological findings of ancient ingots, claiming they could be evidence of this strange mission. Whether you believe Sitchin's theory or not, it raises one of the oldest questions we have ever asked. Are we really alone?
Extraterrestrials or ancient astronauts having come to Earth and visited Earth has been around.
The strike that changed divine history. For all the stories of gods and their grand power, there was another side to life in ancient Mesopotamia, a side built by those who labored in silence until they could not take it anymore. And not many talk about this group that played a critical role behind the scenes, the Aigi. The Aigi were known as the workers of the gods. They were the ones who kept the world running, while the higher gods gave the orders. In simple terms, they were the builders, the miners.
So these people were working, but they weren't supposed to be enslaved. They were volunteers.
The ones responsible for maintaining the very foundation of life on Earth and beyond. As mentioned before, the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of resources, especially gold. But mining the Earth for gold was no small task, so they turned to the Aigi. The Aigi were sent down to toil in the harshest conditions. Most of their labor took place in the Abzu, an underground world often described as dark and filled with endless water. In the myths, this was considered part of Enki's domain. It was here that the Aigi were forced to work.
The Aigi, who were the working-class Anunnaki beings who were cleaning out the Euphrates and Tigris River.
They dug deep shafts and tunnels and maintained structures. In essence, they did the heavy lifting that the Anunnaki wanted no part of. And for what seemed like thousands of years, the Aigi endured the back-breaking labor, the heat, the darkness, the endless digging, all with no rest. Their work kept the mission going, but they received little in return. It is a story that mirrors real life, both ancient and modern, where entire groups of workers are exploited to build great empires, yet their names fade from history. But the Aigi were not willing to suffer forever. Over time, frustration turned to anger. and that anger turned to bold action.
250,000 years of labor on Earth and also, according to them, on Mars.
They had reached their breaking point. According to the myth, the Aigi gathered in secret. Away from the watchful eyes of the Anunnaki, they planned their rebellion. It was not going to be subtle or quiet. It was going to send a message. They marched as one toward the great house of Enlil, the commander of the Earth operations. Torches in hand, they burned their tools. The very same tools that had helped build cities, carve rivers, and extract the gold that the Anunnaki so badly wanted. In that moment, they refused to serve. They stood together, declaring their work was done. It was, in a way, one of the earliest examples of organized rebellion, a strike that shook the heavens. The ancient texts describe the scene as chaotic and filled with fear.
That they use to indicate the rulers who come down from the heavens at the beginning of the story. That glyph simply indicates the sky.
Enlil, powerful as he was, had not expected such defiance. The Anunnaki gathered in their council, alarmed by what had happened. The rebellion did not bring down the Anunnaki completely, but it forced change.
Anunnaki are those who came from the heavens to the earth. You can follow the logic.
The uprising of the Aigi set in motion events that would reshape the relationship between the gods and those they ruled over. In many ways, this myth reflects something very human. When those in power push too hard for too long, even the quietest workers eventually push back. How the Anunnaki designed humans. The Anunnaki had a problem on their hands. With the Aigi gone, their grand mission on Earth was falling apart. The mines lay quiet. The gold they desperately needed was no longer being pulled from the ground. Something had to be done.
There's actually the very first gold mines discovered. They're dating them back to about 200,000 years ago.
Enlil, frustrated and unsure, began to wonder if there was another way to solve this. That is when Enki, known for his wisdom and clever thinking, stepped forward with an idea that would change the world forever. Enki proposed creating a new being, a worker who could handle the harsh conditions of Earth without constant supervision or rebellion. In other words, they needed to create a new species, a primitive worker. The ancient texts called this new being Adamu. You might already recognize how similar that name sounds to Adam, the first man mentioned in the Bible.
Adam, and he eats it as well, so she makes him self-conscious. They both wake up. The first thing that happens is they realize that they're naked, and they cover themselves up.
Many believe this is not a coincidence. The gods agreed to this bold idea. They turned to Enki, whose knowledge of science and magic made him the ideal one to take charge. Alongside him was Ninhursag, the goddess of birth and creation. Together they began the process of designing humankind. But this was not done with ordinary tools. The ancient accounts say they combined divine essence with earthly materials. Clay, shaped carefully by the hands of gods, was mixed with something far more powerful, the blood of a slain god. Some versions claim this fallen god was one of the rebellious Aigi. His blood carried not just divine traits, but also the spark of rebellion, something that would forever live within humanity. The first human being came to life, but there was still a flaw. This new creature, the Adamu, could not reproduce. The gods would have to keep creating them by hand, one at a time. It was slow, it was exhausting, it was not enough. So Enki and Ninhursag went back to work. Their goal now was to design an Adamu that could create life through reproduction.
Enki says, I have an idea that will stop this war. There's an existing being on this planet.
After careful planning, they succeeded. A male Adamu was created, complete with the ability to reproduce with a female counterpart. With this breakthrough, the gods had what they needed. The human race as we know it was born, but their purpose was clear from the start. Humans were designed to work, to mine for gold, to build temples, to serve the gods in every possible way. They were intelligent, capable, and above all, obedient, the perfect labor force for the Anunnaki. The ancient texts describe this as the true beginning of Homo sapiens.
The Sumerians described them as humanoid, but non-physical spirit beings.
Not as a random twist of evolution, but as the result of careful, intentional design. Whether you believe this version or not, it remains one of the most fascinating and controversial theories about human origins ever recorded. Now, with humanity in place, the Anunnaki's mission could continue, but their involvement with Earth was far from over. The hidden designers of mankind. They say knowledge changes everything, and in this case, it might just change the way we look at ourselves. When the Anunnaki mixed their DNA with that of early hominins, it was not some simple experiment. It was a process that changed the natural course of life on Earth. These early humans were no ordinary beings. They carried traits that had never existed in hominins before. Their strength, physical endurance, and even mental capacity were far beyond what nature alone had given their ancestors. And then there were the Nephilim. These were the offspring of the Anunnaki and humans. They were a hybrid species that seemed almost godlike to the early people of Earth.
Because then you're not a slave anymore. You're doing this for the honor of the gods.
And for people who think all this talk is really crazy.
The Nephilim were known for their incredible size and power. In addition to this, they also had very long lifespans. It was believed that these beings could live for thousands of years. Meanwhile, the pure-blooded Anunnaki appeared to be immortal in the eyes of ancient humans. This was simply because they aged so slowly compared to mankind. But not everyone among the Anunnaki was comfortable with this situation. Enlil, one of their leaders, began to fear that humans would soon desire the same longevity and abilities just like their creators. That fear led to a major decision, one that would define the human species for generations to come. The Anunnaki altered the genetic makeup of humans once again. This time, their goal was not to improve, but to control. They carefully reduced the lifespan of humans and restricted the full capacity of their brains. What could have been an intelligent, long-living species was deliberately held back. The version of humans that resulted from this, sometimes called Human 1.0, was designed to be functional but limited. They had intelligence to serve their purpose, but not enough to challenge their creators. The ancient Sumerian tablets that describe this process talk about it like a breeding program.
Holding a tablet that was written thousands of years ago and being able to read what it says.
So, just like the way humans today breed animals for specific traits, the Anunnaki did the same to humans. It was never about creating equals. It was about creating workers. Now, some may dismiss these ancient writings as pure myth, but supporters of this theory point to modern science and technology. Cloning, in vitro fertilization, genetic modification, all these things were unthinkable just a century ago.
That's the old version of an image of the double helix of DNA, or at least it looks super similar to that.
Yet today, they are not only possible, but actively happening. That leaves one big question. If we can do all this now, is it really so hard to believe that someone else may have done it long before us? The Great Flood Decision. The rise of humans was never part of the plan. At least, not like this. Once the first humans could reproduce, everything changed. Their numbers grew quickly. It was not just limited to Mesopotamia, but across the distant mining camps where the Anunnaki had set up their operations. With each passing generation, humans became harder to control. They spread fast, built communities, and multiplied beyond expectation. Enlil again saw this growing population as a threat. In his eyes, the humans had become unruly. They were unpredictable and far too numerous. So he decided it was time to erase them. The method he chose was brutal but effective, what we now call the Great Flood. While Enlil was determined to wipe them out, not everyone agreed. Enki, the god known for his wisdom and connection to life, believed humanity deserved to survive.
The gods regressed their decision to destroy humanity and are glad that Ziadsura saved their creation.
Much like the character Prometheus from the old Greek legends, Enki stood up for the humans. Meanwhile, the Anunnaki had another concern. Their long-lost homeworld, Nibiru, was drawing closer to Earth. With it came severe climate disruptions and rising chaos across the planet. Enlil saw this as the perfect opportunity to deal with the human problem. In the Grand Assembly of the Anunnaki, Enlil made his case. He argued that they should simply let nature handle it. The coming disasters would wipe out the humans. And as for the Anunnaki, they would be safe, observing everything from their ships in orbit. But Enki was not about to watch silently. He had a plan, and unlike Enlil, his plan did not involve turning his back on mankind. The oldest flood story on Earth. Flood legends have been told for thousands of years. but historians believe the oldest one comes from the Sumerian tablets.
About these ancient tablets. Some of the most interesting things about ancient history.
These writings date back to around 2300 BC. However, the story itself is believed to have existed much earlier. It had survived by getting passed down by word of mouth until it was finally written down. Over time, different versions of this flood account began to turn up in other ancient civilizations. One of the most popular examples is found in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh. This dates between 2150 BC and 1400 BC. And then, of course, there is the familiar version from the Hebrew Bible, the story of Noah's Ark.
Only Noah is found righteous in God's eyes. God tells him to build a giant boat and gather 2 of every animal and his family on board.
It was recorded around 1450 BC, but long before Noah or Gilgamesh, there was Ziusudra. In the Sumerian king list, he is listed as the final ruler of Sumer before the Great Flood happened. And according to ancient records, Ziusudra was chosen to survive and protect life on Earth when disaster came. Interestingly, in the later Babylonian version of the flood tale, this same figure appears under a different name, which was Utnapishtim. The pattern is clear. Different cultures retold the flood event, changing details over time.
No matter where you go in any culture, you're going to discover that.
But they always maintain the same basic message. In the original Sumerian account, it was Enki who warned Ziusudra of the coming disaster. According to how the account goes, he instructed him to build an ark so that he, his family, and the animals could survive. The ark was described as being built somewhere in the mountains to avoid the detection of Enlil, who was determined to let the flood destroy humanity.
In the Noah's Ark tale, God regrets creating humanity because they have become wicked and decides to destroy them with a great flood.
Later on, the Hebrew Bible would present a very similar version of this event, but in that telling, the flood is blamed on human sinfulness. Many scholars believe the biblical writers drew their version from much older Mesopotamian traditions, but added a religious explanation to suit their beliefs. Whether or not people choose to believe these ancient tales is one thing, but what is hard to ignore is how similar these flood stories are, despite coming from different times and regions. How the Great Flood changed humanity.
There are a few different flood myths from Greek mythology, but we're just going to have a look at the best known.
According to the ancient Sumerian texts, when the time came for the flood to happen, the Anunnaki left Earth behind. They escaped in their flying craft while a massive wall of water swept across the planet. Most of humanity never stood a chance. The flood destroyed human settlements everywhere. Entire villages, cities, and farmlands disappeared under the waters. For 6 long days and nights, storms battered the land. By the time the waters calmed, most of the world, as people knew it, was gone. Just like in the later Babylonian and biblical versions, the ark carrying the survivors eventually came to rest on Mount Ararat. That detail has remained consistent across several cultures, but the Babylonian version adds another layer to the disaster. It was not only heavy rains that destroyed everything. Massive winds tore through cities, buildings collapsed, dikes meant to control water burst apart. The chaos described sounds eerily similar to the effects of a massive celestial event. Some suggest it could have been a passing planet or even a giant asteroid striking Earth. As you know by now, stories of a global flood are not unique to Sumer or Babylon. They exist across the world. In Hinduism, the flood is called Pralaya. In Chinese mythology, there is the tale of Gun Yu. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Norse spoke of Bergelmir. And of course, the book of Genesis tells the well-known tale of Noah's Ark. The real question is, are these just separate cultural myths, or are they all connected, like different pieces of the same ancient puzzle? Some researchers believe that all these flood stories could trace back to the Sumerian account, a story of powerful overlords, possibly the Anunnaki, who grew displeased with their human creations. Could it be possible that the Anunnaki saw the coming disaster and left in time? Or worse, were they responsible for causing it? And when the flood swept across the earth, did it not only wipe out most early Homo sapiens, but also erase the physical evidence of the Anunnaki's rule on this planet? It is a theory that still sparks debate today. Rebuilding after the flood. When the world began to dry out and the floodwaters pulled back, The planet was barely recognizable. Earth had changed. The planet Nibiru drifted away from our solar system once again. But for those left behind, there was work to do.
Which he quite controversially believed actually exists in our solar system.
As time went on, Enlil began to regret his decision to wipe out humanity. When he discovered that some people had managed to survive the Great Flood, he had no choice but to back down and let them re-establish on Earth. With this, the Anunnaki, along with the small number of humans who had survived, began the slow process of rebuilding. Enki, who had always shown a particular interest in shaping humanity, took the lead in restoring civilization. One of his first major steps was transforming the marshy wetlands along the northern shores of the Persian Gulf.
Waters receded, became a mountaintop, and now life, including humanity, would start again.
What had once been a swampy and unlivable land was drained and reshaped. Dikes were built to control flooding. Irrigation systems were dug with care. Canals were created to link the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The efforts soon turned the barren region into fertile land. But the changes did not stop there. Animals and plants were brought from the Anunnaki home planet of Nibiru to Earth. These were not wild creatures, but carefully chosen species that could be domesticated, farmed, and raised for food. This became the foundation for what would later be called the Sumerian civilization. But Sumer was more than just farms and cities. It was a place of knowledge. The Anunnaki taught their human creations everything they needed to survive and thrive. Schools passed down lessons in botany, zoology, and geography. Students learned mathematics, astronomy, and architecture. Science, agriculture, and even theology were introduced. It was the beginning of organized society. With time, worship of the Anunnaki became common. Their advanced abilities and appearance set them apart. Over generations, they were viewed as gods. Religions slowly formed around them. Law codes were written, social structures developed, and kings were chosen to help maintain order over the people. Modern historians now agree that Sumer was the world's first recorded civilization, even older than Egypt, Greece, or Rome. But according to the ancient Sumerian records, there is more to the story. Enki's firstborn son, Marduk, eventually took control over Egypt. There, he became known as Ra. His own children, Shu and Tefnut, married each other, setting a pattern that would be seen in Egyptian royalty for centuries. Their children, Geb and Nut, also became husband and wife. They produced some of the most well-known figures from Egypt's early rule. Among them were Osiris and his sister wife Isis, along with Seth and Nephthys. The Great Flood had destroyed the original Anunnaki Mission Control Center, which was located in the ancient Sumerian city of Nippur. But they had plans to rebuild. A new control site was chosen. They called it Mount Moriah, or Mount of Directing. This small mountain would later become Jerusalem, a city which holds deep religious importance for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to this day.
What is the difference between being a Christian, between being a Jew, between being a Muslim?
So, Jews believe that Jesus was not the Messiah and was not a good prophet.
The Sumerian tablets and the creation debate. The more we dig into ancient history, the more it feels like some pieces have been deliberately left out. As you have seen so far, the Anunnaki were not imaginary gods or mythical spirits. The Sumerian tablets describe them as ancient visitors who came to Earth with a purpose. Their goal, as mentioned earlier, was to mine gold, share their advanced knowledge, and create human beings to serve as a labor force.
They decided to fashion a worker being, a slave to mine the gold for them.
But that idea does not sit well with mainstream historians. They claim the ancient Sumerians were simply telling old fables passed down through generations. But if that were true, why would the scribes have gone through the trouble of carving these records into clay tablets? It would have taken time, effort, and skill. Surely they believed what they were writing down. Beyond that, there is something else worth thinking about. Many independent researchers, those outside the usual academic circles, believe humanity's origins have been misrepresented. They suggest that the version of creation recorded in religious texts like the Bible is only a condensed, simplified version of a much older and more detailed account. According to them, the Sumerian tablets provide that detailed version, one that speaks of visitors from beyond Earth shaping human history. When you look at other ancient cultures around the world, the pattern becomes even harder to ignore. Civilizations from different corners of the planet share stories filled with knowledge of the stars, the solar system, and beings that came from the sky. How could they have known such things? It makes you wonder. Also, the idea that similar-looking gods and sky beings appear in different cultures across the world leaves us with questions that cannot be ignored.
They tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
Were there different groups of visitors coming to Earth over time? Or was there a single group, the Anunnaki, shaping human progress wherever they went? As you have seen so far, the ancient records hint at one race of beings remembered by many names, but sharing the same traits: advanced knowledge, a connection to the heavens, and in some cases, being worshipped as gods. If that is true, it might explain why so many cultures describe sky beings descending to rule and guide early humanity. It also makes you wonder why so little physical proof has been found, why so much of it has been labeled myth and buried under centuries of doubt.
Whether or not it's just mythology or if it's fact, no one really knows.
But the records still exist, and the questions are still being asked. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more fascinating topics like this, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. There is a lot more to uncover. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.